Happy Pride, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Pride Month. Happy Taco Tuesday. All of the things. Good to see all of your faces. Put in the chat where you're zooming in from. We are going to dive right in, but put in the chat where you're zooming in from. Wichita, Kansas. I'm in Philly, Atlanta. Oregon, or just that's you twice. South Philly, yay! Oh, hey, Gary. Sacramento, New York. All right. Well, Mexico. Hey, hey, Kylie. So like I said, we're gonna dive right in. This is a unique Pride Month edition, if you will, where we're gonna go over, especially since there's a lot of new faces in the group, we're gonna go over everything that we've covered over the last 10 months. With the idea of the whole point of going over everything that we've gone over in the last 10 months is, and we talked about this at the last LQA a lot, is to show all of the connections and interconnections that these topics have that seemingly when you hear about them in the news, you don't have a sense of how everything is related. That the conservative right moves very slow, strategic, coordinated, and and social media has a big part to do with it. There's always a big to-do in the news about, the Bondi memos and trans folks being domestic terrorists, or, we get these spikes in the news, but we don't have a sense over a period of a year how all of these things have happened chronologically and how they're interrelated. So we've been doing this for 10 months. We've had, that would mean 20 sessions. And a lot of the sessions, we've hit on things multiple times. Childs v. Salazar, which is one of the ones that we're going to start with. We ended up talking about it 3 times over the last 10 months because we talked about it before the Supreme Court oral arguments. We talked about it after the Supreme Court issued its opinion. And then we talked about it most recently when Colorado came up with their workaround on how they're going to still find a way not to officially ban conversion therapy, but still stop conversion therapy. So, like I said, I will dive right in because we have a new record of slides at 91. It was in the 3 digits, but I did my best to cull it down. And so we are at 91. If you are new, which are a lot of new faces, if you are new, 3 to 4 slides on a topic, you're not going to walk away when we spent an entire hour on the topic. You're not going to walk away with, a complete understanding. But if anyone, even if you have been here all 20 sessions, if we go over a topic and you want to hear more about it, feel free to email me. And we have the school community, which, Macklin, if you want to drop in the link to the school community in the chat, there's 2 ways in which folks can interact with me off of social, which a lot of people want that from a confidentiality standpoint. And that is here in these LQAs, twice a month, every other Tuesday at noon, or in the school community. There's about 250 of us there. And folks, ask questions, DM me. 2 people out in Scottsdale and Phoenix got together for coffee. So if you happen to be in the same geographic area, you can have a friend. But the school community is also a place where I do pop-up webinars. So if there's any, and even if it's a topic we haven't yet discussed that you want to go over, polyamorous estate planning is one someone emailed me about. So if there's something we haven't talked about, but it's not specific for an LQA, we can do it in the school community. So definitely join that if interested. So as always, be respectful. Don't need to tell the LGBTQ community that. We were born kind and respectful. That's sort of our being. And mute your mic at the end when we have questions. We can go ahead and unmute you. And like I said, the agenda is a review of the LQAs to date. And then we'll talk about the topic for the next session. I am vacillating back and forth on two different things. So I am Angela, and I'm an estate planning attorney. I'm an LGBTQ estate planning attorney, and really just a human rights advocate. I started out working in human trafficking and genocide. I worked at the War Crimes Tribunal for the Rwandan genocide. Quickly realized that everybody I worked with were shells of human beings, and I didn't want to become them. So I stopped doing that, and I moved back to the US. I'm Canadian originally, and realized, this is 18 years ago now, I need to update that, that one of the human rights issues here in the US at that time was LGBTQ issues. So I opened up a law firm geared towards the LGBTQ community and those who love us, is my only requirement. All right, so we'll dive right in. Again, Charles v. Salazar, we've talked about this 3 different times over the last 10 months. It was a challenge to the constitutionality of Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. And the challenge was that it was a violation of the therapist, Chiles's First Amendment freedom of speech, that she was being limited on what she could talk about, talk therapy, within the 4 corners, if you will, within the boundaries of the therapy room. And she absolutely was being limited on what she could speak about because conversion therapy was banned, and so she couldn't talk about it. And so the challenge was that it was a viewpoint based, that because they thought conversion therapy was bad, they being Colorado, that viewpoint, she was being discriminated against based on her views. And, the Supreme Court decided 8-1 in her favor. And I agree jurisprudentially that she was right as well. It was supposed to come down this month in June, but it came down super early, really, because everyone was in agreement that it was a violation of her First Amendment rights. This is a slide from back then, from September of last year. Potential outcomes. I thought most likely was a more narrow ruling, a more narrow reversal, that the court would find it unconstitutional, but wouldn't full on reverse the bans on conversion therapy and come up instead with a hybrid rule. So that's what most people thought was going to happen. Second, most likely, a broad reversal, that the court would view these as viewpoint based, apply strict scrutiny, and that the ban on conversion therapy would immediately fall. What happened? The second, broad reversal. Immediately, Colorado's law was deemed unconstitutional, and now every other state, there are 26 states with similar bans, and those are working through the courts as we speak. But ultimately, and this was why we talked about it a third time, Colorado knew in some way, shape, or form they were going to lose, that the ban on conversion therapy was in some way going to be deemed unconstitutional. And so very early on last year, and then more formally in January of this year, they started working on a replacement law. So instead of a ban, working on legislation, providing folks that are injured a private civil right of action for the folks that end up going through conversion therapy that they now have prior to. This is a much, much better legal regime, if you will, for folks that actually have to suffer through conversion therapy, because previously it was still happening. Kylie, that is coming in from Mexico, brought this up when we talked about it. It was still happening, right? And then if they were the victim of it, they didn't have a cause of action for it, other than calling the medical board and reporting said therapist for having violated, and then they could potentially lose their license. But the human that was injured had no cause of action, couldn't sue. With this workaround, so it's technically legal, but with this workaround, now folks have a private civil right of action, they can sue, and no statute of limitations. So in other states that didn't have a ban but had a private right of action, civil right of action, there were still statute of limitations. There are, even on minors being sexually abused, where we see with the church and priest molestation cases, there's statute of limitations. This one has zero statute of limitations, and you could recoup all, you're in therapy for 40 years, you could recoup 40 years worth of your therapy costs. So super, super huge. And then as of yesterday, so as I went through these topics, I asked, I Googled for status updates, and everything's like 22 hours ago, 19 hours ago. Jared Polis finally signed it into law as of yesterday, first day of Pride Month. Yay. And it goes into effect on July 1. So he was very reticent about signing it and didn't talk about it. And we didn't really know what was going to happen, but it is signed, it is law, and it really is a model for other states. California started with a good model, but Colorado got there faster, and it's better than what California had. And I wonder how California will revise theirs, if they will or not. But really, really good end result. And again, the damages, they can recover any and all types of damages, economic, non-economic, and punitive, which is huge. That's where you see like a judgment for 100,000 and then 4 million in punitive damages. So jurors can really do whatever they want there. No statute of limitations ever. All right, so next topic, and there are not good transition slides. So we'll just transition to the next topic because there are 91 slides. So transition slides brought us above and beyond the 3 digits. So the NSPM, this is around trans folks being deemed domestic terrorists. And so with the NSPM, or just this whole chronology, again, this is something that was huge in the news about a month or so ago in April, but folks weren't tying together chronologically everything that went into the line item in the budget in April, and then subpoenas that are being issued right now as of May, as of early May. So it all started really with Charlie Kirk's assassination, and the government choosing to use that as a way to say, you know what, trans folks are dangerous and assassinate people. And so Trump issued the National Security Presidential Memorandum and countering domestic terrorism. And this was the blueprint. So this set the foundation that then the Bondi memos operationalized. And the enforcement mechanism, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Okay, but what a lot of folks emailed me and or DM'd me and said, who makes up the Joint Terrorism Task Force? Like, if I know to be afraid of ICE, I know who ICE is, even though we can't really even identify them anymore because they illegally are not wearing ICE uniforms. But at the time when they were, it was easy to identify ICE agents. But the Joint Terrorism Task Force, nobody knew how to identify. And it's because they make up everybody. Federal law enforcement, state police, state troopers, local police, and any other agency. So really, this presidential memo now made enforcement vehicles into any and all multi-agency law enforcement team, if you will. And then the TIVE, the transgender ideology inspired violent extremism. So the memo, or his presidential foundation, set out this definition: proposed domestic terrorism as a label, not a law passed by Congress. So and again, we've talked about this topic 3 times. We talked about it in September, we talked about it in December with the Bondi memos, and then we talked about it in April. But in September, the big uptick in the news was, trans folks are terrorists. It was never passed as a law and not operationalized to that extent where the humans were deemed to be terrorists. It's the ideology inspired violence that folks that are advocates of, and that encompasses now, based on how this has all chronologically played out, that encompasses anyone who is an LGBTQ plus advocate at the end of the day. Bondi memos, there were two, but that happened all throughout December. And this is what operationalized it. So ultimately, the memo framed folks as left-winged and anti-fascist, radical gender ideology. It allowed for cash bounties for identifying. It renewed an FBI phone tip line. Like, nobody uses tip lines anymore, but it brought back using the telephone and calling tip lines, and $10,000 cash rewards for information leading to the arrest of advocates. So again, it's a very fine line of saying that they are criminals, but instead an activist that is fulfilling and fighting for LGBTQ causes. And then April's budget. So we'll talk about April and May on this slide. So in April, it got a line item in the budget. So you had the president who set the foundation, you had Bondi who operationalized it in the memo, then you had the April budget line item, which now has money to pay said cash rewards, to deputize more law enforcement teams. And then in May, so we've seen and we've talked about all of the subpoenas that have gone to hospitals, CHOP and Boston and New York, and all of the things that, in order to get the lists of trans folks that have been patients at the hospital, including their family members and the people who treated them, and so on May 6th, the very first criminal subpoena was issued to a New York hospital. So now we've reached the point of, okay, this is for national security, and so therefore it's criminal. And so while the hospitals have been able to avoid all of the subpoenas to date and win in court, we still haven't had any outcome on the New York criminal subpoena, but I don't see how they get around that criminal subpoena if it is in the name of ultimately national security, because the ideology behind advocating for trans folks and then ultimately giving them gender affirming care to help their transition as trans folks, I don't see how legally they're going to get around now without facing jail time, and there's grand jury indictments and all of the things. So that's actively playing itself out. So far, only one hospital in New York has been issued that criminal subpoena. We talked about inexpensive ways to leave the country. And at the last LQA, where we talked about the line item in the budget for the domestic terrorism identification of trans activists and folks that believe in trans ideology. We talked a lot, one of the members asked, when is it time to peace out? When shit's on fire is not the time to get the go bag ready. Okay, so in this particular LQA we had very early on, post-election, but it still applies. So these are conventional moderate cost paths, digital nomad and remote worker visas. And also, I talked about the next LQA and me vacillating back and forth on what the topic is going to be. We're going to talk about Little v. Hecox as a part of today's review. Little v. Hecox is a case where we're going to get the opinion from the Supreme Court at the end of June. And it likely will not be very good. And it's It's going to be one of the most impactful Supreme Court decisions, in my opinion, on LGBTQ issues moving forward. We spent a whole LQA on little v Hecox, but seeing as it will likely come down June 26th, 7th, 8th, or 3rd or 9th, somewhere around the end of June, I don't think it makes sense to talk about it again on the 19th when we won't have the opinion, and then 2 weeks later talk about the opinion. So for the 19th, I'm going to put together a panel of folks who have moved abroad. I have clients who live in Vietnam and use the digital nomad remote visa in order to do that. France, Mexico, Spain, and Vietnam. So those are the countries that I'm going to have covered on that panel. So that will be the 19th, and then June 30th is the next LQA, and it will either come down that day or it will have come down 4 days, so I won't have very long to digest it, but it should be fine as long as it doesn't come down on the 30th. If so, then I'll come up with something else for the 30th. But digital nomad, remote worker visas, work visas, skilled. So if you have a profession, a license of some sort, the downside though is that the place that you want to go has to have a demand for that particular license or job. Long-term residents without investment visas. So there are, basically the whole point of this LQA was to show folks that there are so many ways to skin a cat that you don't have to buy the golden visa at $500,000 or $750,000. The lowest I found was $140,000, I think in Grenada. But there are golden visas that you can buy your way in, but there are other ways to do it, and that was the whole point of this particular LQA. Ancestry, family or partner, your partner route. Germany allows for partner routes. Tom, who works with me on Pride Plans, his partner is German, and they went over to Germany and got Tom started on the German paperwork. So there are a lot of countries that if your partner is a citizen, you don't have to get married. So it's worth looking into that. And then Canada on the ancestry piece just last year allowed for that, which a lot of folks are reaching out to me for contacts in Canada to help with that. So, and also with any of these conventional moderate cost paths, you need to speak with a lawyer from the country that you're interested in. Okay, so folks will email me and say, Angela, can you help me get to Canada? And at first I thought it was because I was Canadian, and no, they really just thought because I'm a lawyer, I can help them. But no, you need a Canadian lawyer to help you with that. Student visas. So not always cheap, but this could be a cheap way. I did have a client, enroll in English as a second language in a country. And so it was like a 16-week, but that got her there long enough to be able to declare residency. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get my MBA and spend $100,000 in order to go to Ireland. Instead, it was like a $2,000, course in order to learn how to become an English as a second language, teacher in a country. And now you're there, and you're there for 16 weeks. Even if you have to come back, then you can go back. It's about getting that initial certification as an ESL teacher. All right. Super, super easy way. And that is in demand pretty much everywhere. So, visa-free long tourist stays. One of my favorites is Albania. So not a super, super LGBTQ friendly country, but really beautiful. They call it the poor man's French Riviera. So if you just Google it, it's like you're on the coast of Monaco, but you're in Albania, and it's about 1/32 the fraction of the cost. But there are some countries that allow for a 1 year. Just by virtue of you flying there, you can live there visa-free. Then you get a cheap apartment because, again, Albania is super cheap. And then folks use that as a launch pad to visit other countries to figure out where they would want to live. Okay, so it's not that you're living in Albania for a year, it's you're using it to, and the flights are super cheap. When I lived in Tanzania, I went to 16 countries, like it was like $45 to fly to Cairo, 75 bucks to go to Madagascar, right? So once you're there, the puddle jumpers to go to other countries is super, super inexpensive. Non-conventional, ultra budget tactics, house sitting, caretaking, picking second tier cities. Valencia over Barcelona will cut your costs 5 times. Okay, so you still go to Spain, but you don't go to the most well-known city, and Valencia is super cute. So there's that. Well, ancestry and family can be super cheap, but also can be expensive. Up to 15,000 for Italy now. Canada, a lot less expensive. Perpetual traveler, this is dangerous in my opinion, but hopping, not doing the year long and using it as a launch pad, but instead going, 3 months in one place and using your tourist visa. 3 months is the standard tourist visa. From there, then 3 months to the next place, 3 months to the next place. You miss a flight and you could potentially overstay, tax confusions if you're working remote. So not the best in my opinion, but volunteer exchange and working for room and board. I had a couple people do that, and you actually get paid to do it. So, and then studying language schools. And then this one is one of my favorite. I really went down a rabbit hole. There's like 15 slides, and I created a Google Doc with intentional communities from around the world. But intentional communities, there's LGBTQ specific intentional communities, just cool people communities, but ultimately communities that have been set up around the world where they have figured out how people from all over can live in that particular intentional community. They give you visa letters. It's like $50 or euros as a membership fee. So, you can't buy property. You have to stay in the community. You have to work you get like a work document from the community, but really interesting. And you have like automatic friends. One of the things that people didn't want to move or that don't, consider moving is I won't know anyone. Like, yes, I'm getting out of the shithole that is the United States right now, but like now I don't know anybody and I don't have a job and I da-da-da-da. And this kind of solves that where you're automatically around like-minded folks. The ICE protests and the murders and, Alex Preddy and all of everything that was going on in Minnesota within the school community. We had a lot of dialogue about what was happening and how people were feeling. And ultimately, and we're still in this place where the United States has completely abandoned rule of law, right? Like, look at what the White House looks like, and Trump creating a $250 bill with his face on it, and, all of these things. So that ultimately, what is rule of law? At the end of the day, rule of law means that you feel as though you live in a stable country where the laws are transparent and you know what's coming. And that is just not the world in which we live right now. And so we're very much in the midst of a constitutional crisis, less of a uptick in this moment in time. But what is a constitutional crisis? The one that fit Minnesota at the time was when the national government, the federal government, and one or more states disagree about what the Constitution means, right? So when they wanted to send in the National Guard, and basically Minnesota was like, get the F out. And Pennsylvania said they were going to do the same if they went to Pennsylvania, and, what Chicago was doing in Illinois. So this is the big one about where we were at that time. And we've always kind of vacillated on this one, 2 branches, Congress and obviously the executive branch being in disagreement. So Harvard professor put together the DEFCON levels that exist in a country, a democratic country, and what can happen. So DEFCON 5 being, the beginning of the worst, if you will, and DEFCON 1 being absolute worst. And he wrote an article right around the Minnesota protests, uprisings, and said we were at a DEFCON 1.5. DEFCON 5 was the Cold War. Just to put it into perspective. DEFCON 5 was the Cold War. DEFCON 1 is full-blown violence beyond riots. So we were in the riot phase, but unchecked federal government violence, unchecked state violence, unchecked private violence. By insurrection, we had January 6th. He sort of put all of those things together. But January 6th wasn't as big of an insurrection as would be required in his DEFCONs. But ultimately, at that state, that's what his report came back with. Kalarchik, the state of Montana. This is sort of a good thing. We talked about this in the last LQA, so this is very recent. We have a Montana Supreme Court case that held that trans discrimination is by definition sex discrimination. And this is the key point, and that trans folks are worthy of strict scrutiny. We're going to talk about strict scrutiny here in a bit with the Little v. Hecox case. Now, again, seeing how all of these tie together, right? Montana, strict scrutiny, that's what the Little v. Hecox case is all about. Montana decided for the state constitution of Montana. Little v. Hecox is the Supreme Court deciding for all of the United States, but this very same issue. And then means that future laws in Montana now face strict scrutiny. The holding, trans discrimination is by its very nature sex discrimination, not just trans-specific sex discrimination reasoning. Monumental legal ruling. So again, this came about in an employment discrimination setting. And we have Bostock, which is a Supreme Court case that gave us employment discrimination protections federally, but only through Title VII. Not clear across the board. So Kalarchik is monumental because it said constitutionally clear across the board that trans folks are worthy of strict scrutiny. So what states can learn? To use the state constitution aggressively, build claims around sex discrimination, equal protection, privacy rights, dignity rights, ultimately, that legislation, trying to legislate discrimination protections and or any of these will not have the impact. Whatever happens with Little v. Hecox, it can't change the Montana state constitution. They've decided this. All right, St. Mary Catholic Parish v. Roy. This is the most recent LQA that we talked about. SCOTUS just granted cert. Had to do with the pre-K program in Colorado and the Archdiocese wanting an exemption, saying we don't want LGBTQ children and or their families. And they asked for an exemption. Colorado refused the exemption, so the Archdiocese sued. The Archdiocese lost in the 10th Circuit. And now SCOTUS granted cert at the end of April. And that will go up to the Supreme Court. And now this all ties together with the religious exemptions. Okay, so there is litigation that has been going on since 2017 that continues to expand religious exemptions around specific to LGBTQ folks. So basically legislating the ability and the right to discriminate. But how will that impact us in every aspect of life, especially marriage equality? Okay, so this is yet one another in the long line of cases since 2017. So again, the seminal case that said everybody is treated the same. Religion is not a free exit. You don't get to discriminate because you religiously think Angela is going to hell. You still have to take Angela in and give her food at a shelter, or allow her to adopt a child from foster care, or. Okay, so that has been chipped away since 2017. And we had the Fulton v. Philadelphia case, the Carson case, but ultimately, little by little by little, in every aspect of everyday life, there have been 6 Supreme Court cases since 2017 that have chipped away at it and keep expanding the ability to exempt for religious reasons. We have the 3, and a lot of them come from Colorado. Then we have the 303 creative case, the masterpiece cake, the baker who didn't want to bake the cake, the website designer who didn't want to create the registration website for the lesbian couple, Childs v. Salazar, the conversion therapy ban, and now St. Mary with preschool funding. All of these out of Colorado. All of them, so far, we've lost. I don't envision St. Mary being any different. And again, why does this matter? Because it expands the religious exemptions that, for any reason, be it I don't want to sell you this hammer from my hardware store, the Masterpiece Cake Shop, I don't want to do this thing for you that uses my creative abilities, the web designer, to funding, to some of the earlier cases, foster care, but ultimately every aspect of everyday life. All right. This was the title of an entire LQA, the triple threat to LGBTQ rights. And right slap in the middle is the little v. Hecox case. Okay, so we talked about this maybe 4 or 5 months ago. It was last year. And like I said, it's coming up. The decision will come down this month. So it's already decided. Ultimately, they're probably just editing the opinion itself. So what is the triple threat to LGBTQ rights generally? We have the manifesto, which came down in the beginning of the year, little v. Hecox, and the slate of hate, which has to do with LGBTQ religious exemptions. Again, the tie-in. So Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation, completely accomplished. Check. Everything in the Project 2025 has been accomplished. So in the beginning of the year, they came out with Saving America by Saving the Family, a massive manifesto about the next 250 years and how to make it non-LGBTQ friendly at the end of the day. So later marriages, these are some of the issues that they said is destroying America: demographic decline, later marriages, fewer births, cultural decay. The manifesto is framed as the only response to fix it. So they define natural marriage as between a man and a woman. Preferred family is intended to be administrative, financial, and legal. Their enforcement model, 3 mechanisms. You'll also see this very common 3-prong approach, 3 mechanisms, the 3 this, very, very strategic. These 3 enforcement models and mechanisms tie into the greater than coalitions, also 3-prong approach. Okay, and the thread between them all are religious exemptions. All right, first and foremost is definitions. Okay, you can't attack what you don't define and don't know. So in order to attack and to gain support, setting new definitions of marriage, defining it as natural marriage. The government already defined sex as between a male and a female with the executive order on Inauguration Day. That is still being litigated. So it's not the law of the land, but this manifesto says it should be. And then natural marriage, what that means. And really, so the other piece to why definitions are foundational is then the definitions set the policies. And then the litigation are around the policies. Okay, so the 3, mechanism 1, like I said, its definitions, then spending power and program design. So now you have the definitions. You don't need to ban marriage equality. You just need to redefine it, redefine marriage, and then say only people who fit this definition can do that thing. And then also set money associated to it. So there are birthing credits, child credits, that any straight cis breeder that has like 10 kids can get $17,760, basically $18,000 per child. If you're LGBTQ plus and you have a child through IVF and or adopt one child, even if you adopt 5 or have 5 children through IVF, you're limited as an LGBTQ couple for 1 child credit. Surrogacy would be banned. Italy, I cut out that slide, but Italy banned surrogacy, post-election. So it is happening in other places, and the manifesto says surrogacy should be banned. But if we are going to use assisted reproductive means, we only get to do so once for the credit, but straight people can have 19 kids and then 18,000 per kid. Then the litigation. So you set the definition, you set the policies, the tax credits, all the things around the new definitions that you've created. Then I'm going to litigate. I'm going to sue and say, hey, but I have 5 kids. Give me my 4 other child credits. Now we have the litigation posturing. And now this is where the religious exemptions get to come in. And then they get to do whatever they want. It expands religious exemptions as the governing tool. So endorses robust, this is the manifesto, endorses robust religious exemptions and equal treatment for faith-based institutions, again, framed as central to rebuilding family life. And like I said, this will show up in every aspect of our daily lives. That is the whole point. Little v. Hecox is around trans folks playing in sports, but it is not about trans folks playing sports. It is about so much more. It is about the future of LGBTQ rights and truly, and I do not say that being dramatic, but on the surface, it's around sports. Underneath it, LGBTQ equality in the courts. So, yes, the opinion will say whether this 4th grader is able to play sports. However, the real question that the court is first being asked before they can get to that decision is, what level of scrutiny should we use? Kalarchik, Montana said strict scrutiny. The EEOC has vacillated back and forth. The circuits have vacillated back and forth. Bostock, we didn't get strict scrutiny. We got intermediate scrutiny in Bostock. What level of scrutiny will the Supreme Court give us? I'm betting on rational basis. Bostock was intermediate. We would love strict scrutiny. Now, what does all that mean? And again, we did a whole session on this. So when you're in law school, constitutional law is stick a pen in your eye boring. And we're going to go over it in like 3 minutes. So again, anyone this is new for, feel free to reach out to me. And like Macklin said at the beginning, all of these, or to me, but not to you guys, but before we hopped on, all of these LQAs are on YouTube. And so one way to go about watching all of these topics is to go and sit and watch the hour on YouTube, put me on 1.5 speed, see how I sound, because I already talk fast enough. It's fun. And then, but like I said, you can email me and we can do pop-up in the school community on these. So level of scrutiny, we have rational basis, intermediate, and strict. The analogy that my con law professor always used, and it created a visual in my mind, was pole vaulting. Strict scrutiny is Olympic level pole vaulting. Very, 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 very few people can do it. 1% of folks can pole vault at the Olympic level. Okay, so the majority of cases, just like in Kalarchik, if you administer strict scrutiny, the law will fail. Okay, if you are going to treat Macklin different from me for a reason, and we're one person's black or in Macklin's case, non-binary, and I'm not, and you're going to treat Macklin differently because they're non-binary, then you're going to have to show because you're treating two people completely differently because of something that makes up who Macklin is. And so what that case is going to decide is whether being LGBTQ plus, including trans, non-binary, gender diverse, all of the things, is that strict scrutiny. Montana said yes, and I'm thinking the Supreme Court says no. Intermediate scrutiny is again what we got for Bostock, rational, and now intermediate scrutiny is like college level pole vaulting. Okay, and then rational basis is you stepping over a sidewalk. Super easy. The government always wins. So if there's a law that discriminates against Macklin differently than me, Macklin's children are not allowed to go to that Colorado preschool because it's through the archdiocese. Because Macklin is non-binary, then rational basis, they're going to win. Okay, so you think strict scrutiny, the law rarely wins. Intermediate, it really depends, could go either way. Rational basis, if you can step over a sidewalk, the law will pass. And this basically says all that. And rational basis is a rubber stamp. The government needs no evidence. It just needs to state, we're saving money. We don't want to pay for Macklin's kid. Okay, so it just literally, as long as they have a reason, they get to do the thing. So what Hecox could do, and really we can just view this as my pre-Hecox discussion, and then we'll wait for the opinion to come down, and then we'll talk about it all. But so what Hecox could do is, obviously it'll decide all these sports bans that we've been seeing. Do they have the right to say that trans kids are not allowed to play the sport with the sex that they are only allowed to play assigned at birth, right? And are they a protected class? Strict scrutiny. Trans laws, and then any and all LGBTQ. So T for sure, any and all laws that discriminate against trans folks, gender diverse, non-binary, but then LGBTQ as well will get rational basis. They will, well, again, how the opinion is worded will decide on whether or not it touches, how it touches all of the LGBTQ plus umbrella. But then again, we're protecting girls, locker room issues, girls assigned at birth, females assigned at birth, aren't as strong and are losing, or whatever their reason's going to be, it will be enough to pass rational basis. This will not stay in the sports arena. This will spill over into everything else. And then we have the curriculum bans, the bathroom bills, don't say gay, religious exemptions, all of the things. Slate of hate. 10 Tennessee anti-LGBTQ bills. This will go to the heart of that. Okay, so again, the pronged approach. This will go to the heart of ultimately whether, as states like Tennessee pass these anti-LGBTQ bills, the name of SB 1745 is literally called banning Bostock. Bostock said you can't discriminate against us. Tennessee introduced, it's not a law yet, but they introduced legislation called banning Bostock. The other one, I only list 2 of the 10. We went over the 10 previously, but private, just marriage equality, basically, that banks don't have, in hospitals, and any employers, anyone who doesn't want to have to acknowledge your marriage doesn't have to within the state of Tennessee. So again, as a case materializes, this is what the Greater Than Coalition is all about. Right, so you have Kalarchik, you have Hecox, you have the slate of hate. We can only have something go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can only decide what's in front of it. So how do they create a case to go up to the Supreme Court, to have the Supreme Court decide on these? That's the litigation posturing. And then we'll have copy and paste discrimination, how states will use a bad Hecox ruling, even if it's just about trans kid in sports, bathroom bans, pronoun bans, healthcare bans, adoption bans, marriage and parentage carve-outs. Every well, healthcare in hospitals as well, visitation rights, all of the things. The total knockout with marriage. Sprinkle in Hecox, the manifesto, and now sprinkle in and all the religious exemptions. Now bring in the Munz case, Sandra Munz. So I reached back out to Sandra Munz, the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case. I was going to have her and just interview her on an LQA. So that'll be coming up after Hecox, especially, depending on how that happens, on how that is decided. But Munz was a straight couple, was an immigration case, and her husband was deported despite being legally married. The first time that a straight couple, if you remember the movie Green Card with Gérald Depardieu, right? Long has been just, I've done prenups in 72 hours in the face of deportation. Why? Because an American citizen who marries someone who's not an American citizen, up until this case, about a year or so ago, cannot have their spouse deported. No longer. All right. Amy Coney Barrett wrote this opinion, and she said, yes, there are 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to the institution of marriage, but they're not constitutionally guaranteed. We can take them away. The beginning of the unbundling of the rights inherent in marriage. So you take a bad Hecox case, you sprinkle in Munz, you have the beginning of the unraveling of marriage equality. So that's Sandra Munz. They've been apart for like 10 years now. It was just finally the Supreme Court case decided in June of 24. And if you read that case, if you Google it, there's an article on how that is the case that will be cited every time Obergefell is chipped away. The quiet unbundling of marriage. Munz is the case that dismantles Obergefell. Just like with Roe v. Wade, I view a chipping away at Obergefell, not a massive overturning. And as we see these religious exemptions, that's exactly what all of these things are setting up, is the chipping away at Obergefell. So again, what is marriage legally? We talk a lot about the privileges inherent in marriage. There are 1,138 state and federal privilege tied to marriage. They touch every aspect of everyday life: inheritance, taxes, immigration, bankruptcy, healthcare, Social Security survivor benefits, Medicaid, pensions, you name it. It touches those 1,138 state and federal privileges, touch every aspect of American life. I say that being Canadian, there are 4 privileges tied to marriage. I come from a long line of straight people that never got married because it's truly a religious institution and nobody wants it. My mom met my American dad and that's all she wrote. Okay, but ultimately, this country, I always joke, you should not die unmarried in this country if there's someone you like even a little bit. Okay, that's what the lavender marriages were about back in the 70s and 80s, where I would marry Jimmy, right? You go do you, boo, and I'll do me, but you're a man and I'm a woman and we can do this marriage thing, get those 1,138 state and federal rights, and then go live our separate lives, but get all of these benefits, right? So this society is definitely built around pushing marriage, but there's no power inherent in marriage. There is only privilege. When we got marriage equality, we were seen, legitimized in the eyes of the law for the very first time, and we mistook that feeling for power. I got passionate around this topic 20 years ago with the Terry Schiavo case. I always say, I don't tell LGBTQ folks to do their estate planning because I'm an estate planning attorney. I'm a human rights attorney who became an LGBTQ estate planning attorney because it's what LGBTQ folks need to do to protect themselves. If you'd have told me 20 years ago that I'd be an estate planning attorney, again, stick a pen in my eye, boring. I wouldn't have believed you. But it's what we need to do in order to protect ourselves. Terry Schiavo, straight, random, married couple. He was not her healthcare power of attorney. She did not have an advance directive. He said that she was going to haunt him until the day he died if she languished on life support. And mom wanted her on life support. They duked it out in litigation. She languished on life support for 15 years, 1990 to 2005. I entered law school in 2004. She died a few months later. And then that's when it dawned on me, the 1,138 state and federal privileges. Kim Davis was never going to be the case. Okay, so it was a horrible, horrible case. It was weak as far as trying to overturn marriage equality. No circuit split. She never won anything. It was really, truly one of those marketing cases, in my opinion, and they had all the money in the world to do it. The Alliance Defending Freedom Fund. But all of the briefs that they issued and what the Greater Than Coalition now is echoing, language matters. Dobbs, which overturned Roe v. Wade, was all throughout every single one of Kim Davis's legal briefs and expressly mentioned as the strategy for the Greater Than Coalition. So while she was never going to win, the Alliance Defending Freedom, who did Childs v. Salazar, the Masterpiece Bakery, the 303, the firm that is going to argue marriage equality, the Alliance Defending Freedom, and they're behind Dobbs. Language matters. Same strategy, same playbook. Different actors, different money, different framework, all the things. It's already happening. So a judge in Syracuse refusing to marry an LGBTQ couple. I really think Tennessee is going to be the winner as far as like the case that ends up going up to the Supreme Court. I think it'll come out of Tennessee. The Greater Than Coalition. So this is the most recent one that I touched on and that I did a video on for Instagram. And again, I'll do a video on Hecox. And everything leading up to that opinion coming down, I'll just do in videos on Instagram. But the Greater Than Coalition is just that, an organized group of 47 organizations with one stated goal of overturning marriage equality. This is just absolutely insane, and how the HRC has ensued. I did have someone from Austin, an LGBTQ group, has this very similar logo, and I reached out to my IP lawyer to see if they could stop the Greater Than, but he didn't see anything there. However, HRC could come forward and try to, I mean, this is just blatant. So greater than us, right? Equal sign, greater than us on this. It just could not be more bold. Again, 3. We see this all throughout. Everything that they do has a 3-pronged approach, the manifesto, all of the things. So this 3-prong approach, again, heavily based in religious exemptions, the Dobbs playbook. So we have legislative pressure. So, expressly, we've seen Michigan. There was a big uptick in the news when Michigan passed a resolution to overturn, marriage equality. Nothing can happen with these state legislative pressures. I did a bunch of videos. Please don't freak out. Nothing can happen to you from this. Has to go to SCOTUS, and Obergefell in some way needs to be overturned. But it's part of the concerted effort, right? If all of these states are passing these resolutions, it puts pressure. The religious exemption litigation track. They have, like I said, all the cases from 2017. This many Supreme Court decisions in just a decade. Religious exemptions are it's the new thing. And I've been saying since Hobby Lobby, which Hobby Lobby is funding all of this, by the way, over $75 million. But since Hobby Lobby, 250 religious leaders asked Obama, at the time was president, apply Hobby Lobby to LGBTQ issues. Well, the president can't just do that. But ever since 2014, this has been ultimately what, and then since 2017, the Supreme Court cases started exactly that, applying it to LGBTQ issues. Then Justice Thomas's open invitation. Right? So never have we ever had a Supreme Court justice say, please bring me a case. I'd love to overturn Obergefell. That's literally what his concurring opinion in the case that took down Roe v. Wade said, is we really need to take a look at Obergefell and all of the cases that preceded it. And the Greater Than campaign exists to answer that invitation ultimately. But how does it answer the invitation? Well, and what about the Respect for Marriage Act? A lot of people, especially after my last video, emailed and asked, like, but what about the Respect for Marriage Act? Okay, Obergefell goes away, but that was the whole point of the Respect for Marriage Act. It does, they don't have to repeal it to get around it. And the only reason it passed is there were massive religious carve-outs already. They don't even need the religious carve-outs that are being built through all of the religious exemption litigation. It was passed with a massive religious carve-out that you could drive a car through already built in. And then there's what's going to be happening in the religious or Respect for Marriage Act is very interesting because it can't be litigated right now because Obergefell is in effect. It's one of the first laws that was enacted that actually doesn't do anything because it was meant as a precursor to seeing the writing on the wall in Justice Thomas's concurring opinion of they want to overturn marriage equality. And so we're going to pass the Respect for Marriage Act. But we can't litigate the Respect for Marriage Act until or when Obergefell is chipped away at and or overturned. Again, it can be eviscerated without being repealed. SCOTUS will do to gay marriage what they did to abortion. Eviscerate it little by little by little until it just falls over, like how you chip away at and knock over a massive redwood tree, right? What folks can do, again, your LGBTQ estate planning, the 9 documents, especially around chosen family. You have to make your chosen family. So LGBTQ estate planning is for you and or your partner, right? And then also concretizing and making legal your inner circle of chosen family or framly, friends that are close like family. Actually making these documents available to you and usable if and when you need them. It is great to get it done, but you're not going to have the packet of originals with you in the car accident. Uploading them to the cloud, making sure they're in your patient portal so that they have Epic, which has my chart, which disseminates them nationwide. Tell people you did it. All right, so then folks know, you know what? Angela went through the estate planning process last year. I remember her telling us about it and blah, blah, blah. Marriage proof packet. So in addition to these documents, also shrinking down your marriage certificate, having copies, uploading them, name changes, ID matches, all of the things. Having your identity documentation be consistent and having any and all important documents from name change orders to marriage certificates to all the things being in that place where you keep your 9 documents. And then parents, folks with families, making sure you do a second parent kinship and or confirmatory adoption. That differs state to state to state wildly what it is that you need to do in order to get a court decree. But you absolutely need to do that, especially as, like I said, the religious exemptions get larger and larger and larger. And then for those that weren't on the last one, this is my favorite life hack that we've done since we're doing a review. I didn't do a new life hack, but we always end with life hacks. And this, your phone, right now I have Nova, my dog, because she makes me happy. But your phone acts as an affirmation tool. After the LQA where I brought this up, I put the school community logo as, let me see. There we go. The school community logo as one. And then every 6 months in my law firm, we come up with a new chief aim. And I made that a while back. Also, my wallpaper. So we pick this thing up 200 times a day. And what if 200 times a day I'm reminded about Jampilla Law Group's chief aim that we need to achieve by December 31st? Right? So ultimately using this and or just something nice about yourself. You're awesome. Right? You are powerful beyond measure. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a goal, but I challenge everyone by June 19th, today, to think of a goal and or an affirmation that you update your phone with, and then we share it on the 19th. So when I started to put this together, like I said, I vacillated back and forth on what the 19th would be about. It will not be on little V Hecox. I think we talked about it enough. And again, put all of the ties together as far as like how all of these topics interrelate and how all of these topics chronologically since the election have all slowly built on themselves, culminating in this greater than coalition, which is really taking it to the next level, and the continuing legal religious exemptions litigation with St. Mary's, which just got taken, and Little V Hecox, which is going to come down June 26th, 7th, 8th, or 9th. Hopefully not the 30th, but sometime by the end of June. So the 19th will be a panel of clients of mine and or folks that I know that have moved overseas. Okay, so Vietnam, Spain, Mexico, and France are going to be represented, and bring any and all questions. Some were easy, some were hard, remote visas, some just said F it and moved. Everyone went about it differently. Some have kids. So the one in Spain moved with 2 school-age kids. That's a big one that everybody says, well, I can't, my kids are in school. Okay, so I chose folks that are all very different to hopefully touch on any and all of the questions that you guys will have. All right, Macklin, how are we in the chat with questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions. So the first few were from Cece and Amy.
Yep, go ahead.
For those of us who plan to share, can you
Oh,
explain?
real quick, hold on before we get into that to Jimmy and before people hop off. Um, I'm gonna do a video on this, but for the month of June as a Pride gift, one of the biggest things that I've seen post-election is companies no longer having a DEI budget. Okay, so where folks would reach out to me in, October, November to schedule me for June and had budgets of 5,000 to 7,500 as a speaker fee. Now, I mean, one company that they don't want me to disclose their name, a big shoe company, they were like, we'll pay you in shoes. Okay, so ultimately, massive, massive Fortune 100 companies have zero budget, and so I am doing it for free. If any company reaches out to me, the whole point of slashing these DEI budgets and making it criminal is so that folks like myself won't find it worthy of my time to do. Why would I take my time and do it? And so then the information doesn't go out and then the programming stops. And then exactly what they want to have happen happens, which is our messaging goes by the wayside. So if anyone has an ERG or works for a company that has an employee resource group, an LGBTQ plus affinity group, and whether your budget was slashed or not, although everyone's has, I will absolutely do, and it doesn't have to fit within June. If you just reach out to me and we schedule it for July, August, September. Tomorrow I'm doing Shutterstock, their ERG, and their budget was completely slashed. So I've talked to I don't even know all of the companies in the last couple of months, Macklin, I'm blanking, but a lot of them, and really the size doesn't matter. Everyone's budget has been slashed. So feel free to reach out and we can talk about scheduling something like that if you have an employee resource group and they're interested in that. That brought up because of Jimmy and him saying I have a small pride group at church that is interested. But ultimately, if there's a group of LGBTQ folks that want to hear, about how to protect themselves, I'll talk to them. All right, what was the question?
The first one was from Cece and Amy. Can you expand on NSPM 7 and how it will impact the LGBTQ people and regular citizens and people simply exercising First Amendment rights, such as protesting, etc., and what it may look like in the implementation of AI surveillance and how the broadness of the memo could encompass any type of dissent?
I was going to tell you to stop reading that I got the gist, but I like just hearing you read the whole thing. So Yes. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like in that question, you're alluding to the answer ultimately. While it talks about trans ideology, it also, in an umbrella form, talks about and isolates and um, classifies anyone who is anti-capitalism, anti, fascist, anti, you name it. So basically, protesters fall in that. So you don't just have to be. So how does it impact regular citizens? Basically, anyone who disagrees with them and what was, happening during, we want gun control and we should be able to protest. It's our First Amendment right. And all the no kings protesters. So it absolutely expands beyond trans folks. But even within the trans ideology, like my Caravan of Hope falls squarely in there. So as an LGBTQ plus advocate, ultimately, anyone who is fighting for LGBTQ rights in any way, shape, or form, including simply social media, we've seen that accounts just be taken down. And one trans advocate was able through the appeals process to get their page lifted back, brought back alive, if you will. But so it really impacts everyone who basically on some level disagrees with their violation of rule of law, in my opinion. So again, how all of these topics interrelate. Um, yeah, the expat panel for sure. We've been hearing a lot about Uruguay. Yep. Um, it's a very, very expensive country to live, Paraguay and Uruguay, as far as food and all of the things. Take a look at Curacao. So it's the only Caribbean country that recognizes marriage equality, despite the fact that it's 80% Catholic, because it's a Dutch owned country. It's part of the ABCs, the one nobody knows about. Aruba, everyone knows about, but then Bonaire and Curacao, nobody really knows about. So that you can get citizenship easily in Curacao, but there is an investment of some sort. How the investment is different for Curacao than most other golden visas, where everywhere else you just have to put 300,000 in a bank account or whatever. Curacao allows you to either buy real estate, invest in their stock market, because again, it's part of the Dutch, system. So they have their own stock market. So you can invest and turn that 270. It's 270,000 is the minimum, but that 270 could end up being 600,000. At the end of the day, because you invested it in their stock market. The real estate there is what Aruba was 15 years ago. It's the one I'm most interested in, mainly because I would buy real estate. And then that $300,000 beachfront property will be 1.5 million, right? 10 years from now, once Curacao is the most visited island now for Canadians. So, Cuba is like long gone. Now Canadians are loving Curacao. It's only another hop, skip, and a jump. So just Google Curacao, tourism, all the things. As a real estate investor myself, and marriage equality is recognized, and it's super cute, and all of the things. So, but yeah, Uruguay, Paraguay, it's. I always tell folks, like, I don't have kids. I love real estate. I see investments like this, right? And so it's not just about leaving the country. If I'm going to do it, I would not spend money in Portugal. Like the investment's long gone. You had to do that 10 years ago in order for it to actually make you money. So now folks are literally just paying a tax to leave the country. I don't mind paying to leave the country, but I would love for that 300,000 to turn into 1.5 million, right? Like, so that's how I come at it. But folks with kids are going to come at it differently. Folks with, all different types, whatever factors. And that's why I think a panel of folks who did it and had their own factors is so much more fruitful for you, because you'll hear very different, life circumstances and how people went about deciding for themselves and overcoming all of the hurdles and challenges and all of the things. Correct. They can't challenge the Montana Constitution. That's why it's such a great. The Supreme Court of Montana said this. That's that. You know, the Childs v. Salazar, that was a ban. It was a legislative law that was challenged. The government of Colorado passed a law and it was deemed unconstitutional. You can't tell the Supreme Court of Montana, who just decided that it's unconstitutional to discriminate against trans folks, that so there's just not that mechanism. The highest law of the land already decided. Waiting until 2027. Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to follow the whole Tennessee thing because that's, again, really, if I was a betting person, it's coming out of Tennessee. And so I'm very much following that. Of the 10, and I think this is what you're saying, of the 10, some have moved forward, others haven't. And they're being strategic about which ones they want to move forward and which ones they are waiting on. So Tennessee is basically the hotbed. And I'm thinking of getting licensed in Tennessee and opening up an office there and just telling them to go pound sand and really just going to the heart of it, either Tennessee or Oklahoma. The Caravan of Hope was just so impactful in those two places that to have like Memphis gay lawyer on a sign, I think like people would freak the F out. So that's sort of what I'm mulling around. That too would be a 2027, 2028 plan. Nothing happening overnight there, but I think about it way too often. And when I ruminate on something, it usually comes true. So I am wondering, I'm a trans woman married to a trans man. Would we still be considered a gay couple? So no. In that, then you would be AFB, right? Like, so assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth, but inverted. And so, like, what, Cynthia, the issue where I see statuses around trans folks, like what you need to plan for or around or plan against, and is that the law will come out and say that you don't exist. That as a trans woman, being a trans woman doesn't exist. What does that leave you as? Right? Male assigned at birth. If a trans man doesn't exist, what does that leave that person as? Female assigned at birth. So so with the assigned at birth, you then switch, but that's truly, and we talked about this at one of the LQAs, is a legal genocide. Is that ultimately the laws and the documentation and paperwork and your IDs and birth certificates and all of the things that state that you are who you are, if the federal government makes it so that that doesn't exist and they don't recognize trans people, then, you know, and that's, if you would have told me again 25 years ago when I worked in genocide, that 25 years later, we would be at stage 9, level 9 of 10 of a legal genocide in this country on trans folks, gender diverse folks, and non-binary folks. So, and the Limkin Institute came out with that. Initially, they said level 8, now we're level 9 with what's happening around this, the domestic terrorism ideology and all of the things. So, very good question. And again, think of it first as an individual. So for every trans or gender diverse person, think of it, what does that mean for me individually? And then your legal connection to someone else. Okay, but first think about it about you and what, if being trans no longer exists and they eradicate it as a legal identification, where does that leave you? And one of the biggest, the only way to fight a legal genocide that is trying to eradicate you on documents is to document your existence. Okay, you fight legal genocide with legal documentation of your existence. Can you please share how to create a visitation document in the hospital that would? Yep. Nope. So if you go to Pride Plans, go to prideplans.com. And I think it's like $50 there, or $47, something like that. We created it as a one-off because so many people had done their estate planning, which, by the way, if you've done your estate planning, but you haven't updated it or reviewed it since 2024, it's worth looking at it again because of all of these defensive things that we can build into it. But a lot of when I created Pride plans, it was just the 9 documents and that's that. And then a lot of folks were reaching out and saying, well, we actually did our estate planning and we're good to go, but I really want the pet document and the hospital visitation. So we siloed those off and you can just get those. They're enforceable across state lines and internationally. It is merely a contract. Why I love documents is you don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to reason with someone. You don't have to convince someone. You don't have to explain yourself. You just get to do the thing. So it is a contract that says, I, Melanie, allow Angela to be able to visit me in any medical or treatment facility, and that she be given final determination to all others who wish to visit me, whether or not those folks are related to me by blood or by law. Okay, and I usually have, yep. So you can, and then there's a HIPAA waiver. So this gets you in the room, and then they have to talk to me because the HIPAA, and then again, that one slide where I said, make them available to you, make them usable, make them accessible. So you're in the room, they have to talk to me, but I have no power. And then I go to the cloud and I pull down the power document. But this gets you in the room. So this very well could be on your phone and you don't need the hard one. But if for whatever reason you're somewhere traveling, you're in Vietnam, there's no Wi-Fi, like, so while Obergefell is in effect, my married folks, this goes in your passports. Unmarried folks or chosen family all need it. And then, you know, when Obergefell goes away or the religious exemptions get to be such that, you know, marriage isn't recognized in 20% of hospitals because Catholic hospitals are a massive chain, then you go back to having this on your purse wallet. Okay, very good question.
We have a question from Neil. Since our basic human rights are under attack and persecution by our own government in both state and federal level, would it make sense to apply for refugee asylum status in another country? Are there countries that accept the status already?
Yep. When we do the panel, I was going to just do a list of, because nobody on the panel applied for asylum, but it is the first time in history that folks with 401ks and homes are seeking asylum. Typically, asylum seekers have the shirt on their back and they're swimming for safety and all of the things. We have American citizens with assets and all of the things, and folks with no assets as well. But so yeah, and I think it was Canada that just came down and they're loosening it even more. Ireland is a big one. Spain is a big one. It went from 5th most LGBTQ friendly country in Europe to number 1 because of everything that it's doing around LGBTQ issues and especially trans folks. So Ireland and Spain are 2 of the Ireland because it's English. There are other countries that are accepting asylum status, but yeah. And again, you would reach out to a lawyer in that country. So definitely. We did our estate planning with you. Feels good to have it done. You went through Pride plans with Tom. So there are 2 ways to work with me. Either one directly with the law firm or through Pride plans. And then that's when you talk to Tom, who is awesome. He's so sweet. We went to high school together. Random little tidbit. We didn't know then we were both going to be gay lawyers 25 years later, but we've reconnected and now we do this together. So, so I could use some reassurance of listening today about the privileges. And so, yeah, so and again, think about 50 years ago, right? So your revocable trust, this is your revocable trust. And 50 years ago, a creative LGBTQ lawyer saw how this operated in everyday life, and it became our marriage recreation tool. Okay, so with these documents, again, the Terry Schiavo marriage equality privilege power slides that I did earlier, With marriage comes privilege, 1,138 state and federal privileges. There is nothing any of us will be able to do if we lose those privileges. Medicaid, Social Security, all of the things. Okay, but with marriage, there's no power. So while none of us can do anything about whether Obergefell gets overturned, whether the religious exemptions eviscerate the Respect for Marriage Act, estate planning can claw back some of those privileges, the hospital visitation, authorization that Melanie asked about, probate avoidance the trust gives you. That is the most fiscally advantageous, financially significant privilege tied to marriage. The government knows probate sucks. They created it to make money. So they said for every legally married couple, we'll give you one freebie. Angela and Melanie are married. Angela dies. Everything outside of probate to Melanie. One freebie. But then when Melanie dies, there's probate to the intended beneficiaries. So the revocable trust was created to get double probate avoidance. Folks were like, well, great for the one freebie with marriage, right? Think straight people 250 years ago. Whether people were gay or not, everybody got married and had children, right? 98% of folks. So 250 years ago, everybody got married and they left everything to one another and then down to the kids. So folks were like, well, great, thanks for the one freebie, but we actually did all of this and accumulated all of these assets for our kids. So we want to avoid probate to the kids. The one freebie between Melanie and I doesn't really help. We want the freebie to the kids. So the revocable trust was born, allowing double probate avoidance. So then LGBTQ folks, long before we could get married, saw how this operated and went, we don't have a way of binding ourselves together in the bonds of matrimony. But if we become co-trustees, co-CEOs of one another's lives, that creates a powerful, inseverable, impenetrable legal bond. 100 times more power than marriage, because again, there is no power in marriage. It's revocable, so we can sever it, just like divorce. Creates a joint repository where we can put all of our assets, and the win-win-win is it allowed us to claw back the most fiscally advantageous privilege tied to marriage, probate avoidance upon the first of us to die. If Melanie and I have this joint revocable trust, 50 years ago, Angela dies, probate to Melanie. Melanie dies, probate. At a time when we had double probate, this allowed us to get double probate avoidance. Okay, so to the extent that we can claw back privileges, these documents allow us to do that, but the most important thing is it gives us power. Just like Terry Schiavo showed us, her husband was not automatically a power of attorney. I had a straight couple contact me. Someone knew someone that they contacted their senator and he knew me. So straight couple, right? Straight couple, they were in the hospital. LGBTQ folks, our number one issue at a hospital is establishing who we are to one another. Not that we have the power to make a decision, but who are we? Man in a hospital room, woman come running in crying, ma'am, let me take you to your husband. No questions asked, no looking for rings. You're crying, there's a man in a hospital bed, woman come running in, let me take you to your husband. Woman in a hospital bed, woman come running in crying. Skirt! Why are you crying? Who is that? Is that your sister? I don't understand. Why are you crying? Right? Who are you to one another? Well, this straight couple who contact me at like 9 o'clock at night, 27-year age gap. He's 70 something. She's early 50s or mid 40s, whatever it is. I went to law school because I don't do math. Right away, it triggered, who are you? His daughter? His wife? I'm going to need to see a healthcare power of attorney. The minute someone is different, it triggers HIPAA. Everybody legally has to show a healthcare power of attorney, and nobody waives their HIPAA rights until they do. But straight folks get a pass. We do not. Certain straight folks do not. So at 9 o'clock at night, this random straight couple being denied all of the things, just like Terry Schiavo. So at the end of the day, again, power. Yeah, I would definitely include you in my visitation. Thanks, Melanie. I had a client the other day. She put Taylor Swift on hers. So there you go. Just in case Taylor wants to visit. she will be allowed. So, and on that note, 30 minutes over. You guys rock for staying again the whole time. Your questions are awesome. Oh my goodness. He's full on asleep. So happy Tuesday, happy Pride, all of the things. I'll keep you posted. But we will be doing the panel, like I said, on the 19th. And between now and then, if Hecox comes down sooner, we will address it then. So, all right, happy Pride and happy Tuesday. Bye, guys.